happened, Trump. Tonight, we're pumped for the Matt Lauer Hour of Power, a.k.a. the NBC News Commander-in-Chief Forum, where Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump will answer questions back-to-back on national security, military affairs, and veterans issues across town on the Intrepid before an audience of veterans. And oh, is this event timely. Today, new polling from NBC suggests that Trump may have an advantage with some national security voters. To set it all up, Trump went to Philadelphia this afternoon to speak at the Union League, where he talked about national security and made some new proposals, including saying that he would ask military for a plan to defeat ISIS within 30 days of his taking office. He would end the automatic defense sequestration cuts. He'd build up the country's defenses by modernizing the military, adding more equipment, and modernizing the missile defense system. Trump said typically that he would be the best commander-in-chief and, of course, pulled out some lines on his rival.
Three crucial words that should be at the center, always, of our foreign policy. Peace through strength. Unlike my opponent, my foreign policy will emphasize diplomacy, not destruction. Sometimes it seemed like there wasn't a country in the Middle East that Hillary Clinton didn't want to invade, intervene in, or topple. She's trigger-happy and very unstable.
So, John, on these new Trump proposals today, is it good policy, we always ask, and is it good politics?
Well, I think it's most of the proposals that he made, apart from the asking generals to have a ISIS plan in 30 days, are pretty standard issue Republican fare on national security and defense. In that sense, they're fine. The 30-day proposal to ask generals to come up with a plan to defeat ISIS is sort of comical in the context of the kind of criticisms he's leveled against Hillary Clinton, against Barack Obama, against everyone, and even more comical in the context of him saying he knows more about ISIS than the generals.
The Democrats will justifiably say there were a lot in here that doesn't make any sense. He contradicts some of the things, saying he was always against the Iraq war, etc. Right. This speech, if he'd given this speech for the entire campaign, would be very potent politically. It balances traditional center-right positions on national security and critiques the Obama administration with some of the politically powerful positions he's had all along, saying, for instance, America needs the burden sharing needs to be bigger. The allies need to spend more. America needs to be a little bit more about America rather than leading the alliance. I think whoever wrote this with him or for him perfectly understands where the electorate is. I just don't know
whether it's too late.
Whether it's too late. And the Democrats have been so relentless, not just this week, but throughout, in battering him and trying to make him a non-credible messenger.
Yes.
From teleprompter, these positions, I think politically, it is a strong center-right critique and policy proposals that I think hit the sweet spot for enough voters to get a majority. But again, I'm just not sure that he's going to break through with it, and he's got the credibility to sustain it.
Yeah, I mean, that was an answer that both perfectly legitimately blended policy and politics. I basically agree with that. Like I say, though, the ISIS thing is so glaring in some ways because it is basically his way, although I'm sure he didn't quite plan it, although he might have, to answer her criticism yesterday that he has a secret plan to end ISIS. Well, I don't have a secret plan, but what I do have is a TBD plan.
I will say, bell rang, but I will say, the headlines that you see in the major papers: Donald Trump vows to bolster nation's military capability. Donald Trump proposes ending military spending caps to boost military. Trump calls for higher defense spending after months of isolationist talk.
Perfectly fine.
These are all headlines they will love. Let's see how it gets covered in the battleground state.
But I don't think you disagree with me, though, that he could have given the speech starting in mid-May.
Should have.
Should have.
Really good.
And could have.
Great speech politically. Perfectly good policy, but man, late.
All right. Beyond the question of tonight's National Security Veterans Forum, national security and foreign policy have been areas where Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have been firmly in the disagreement zone. Today, we ran into Trump's campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, who explained how important these issues are to voters.
Well, national security and terrorism really have catapulted to the top of the voter concern list. If two-thirds of the country actually want to go in a different direction, and Hillary Clinton represents the old direction, then maybe we'll look at Mr. Trump. He has talked about strength for peace. He's talked about American exceptionalism. He has talked about making sure that we just don't go into war willy-nilly. I mean, Hillary Clinton voted for the Iraq Accords, a large part of how President Obama beat her in the Democratic primary in 2008.
So, Mark, among the many differences between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump on national security, which do you think stand out as being real, significant, and potentially salient to voters?
I think this is an area where there are a lot of disagreements. You know, this isolationist, interventionist thing is a little bit muddled because he's now talking tough.
Towards her.
He's moved towards her.
Right.
And she's moved, they both kind of moved towards each other in some strange ways. You know, I think that he has the upper hand on this issue, and I think Rahm Emanuel and Haley Barbour, two smart people in politics, I think would agree. This notion of America can't carry the burden alone. We need to protect America first, and that includes having spending from allies. I think on things like not closing Gitmo, harsher interrogation, I'm not sure what the mood of the country is, but I will say this.
Those are real and significant.
They're real significant differences.
I don't know where the country. I agree with you, but those are real differences.
Yeah.
He's proposing doing things that are illegal under current law in some of those areas.
But you know, President Bush got reelected with those kinds of policies. I will say this.
Well, they were illegal.
I will say this. Well, arguably they were illegal when they were doing them.
I know. But
I will say this. Trump still needs to consolidate the center-right coalition before he can really move and try to poach in the center. And I think the differences help him at a minimum consolidate the Republican base.
Here is the fundamental difference between the two of them, I believe, on these issues that matters a lot, which is she knows more about the world than he does.
Yeah.
A lot more about the world. And you can disagree with her on policy in a million ways, but she could talk about any country on earth with some degree of depth and what they mean to the United States. And I do not believe he can. No. And that speaks to his fitness to be commander-in-chief. And that's the key argument she's making. I think voters care about fitness to be commander-in-chief.
He's darn lucky he won the coin flip tonight because he goes second.
Right.
So she can't then come in after him and critique everything he said. Big advantage. All right. New polling referenced earlier from NBC News and SurveyMonkey. Interesting results here from the military and veteran demographic. Amongst those voters in this poll, Trump beat Clinton 55 to 36%. When asked which candidate they trust to handle veterans issue, Trump won handily, 25 points over Clinton, 53 to 28. These registered military voters were also asked whom they trust more with nuclear weapons. Here, the two were effectively tied. Voters in the military and veterans are going to be critical, obviously, in the general election. There are places that are key battlegrounds like North Carolina, Florida, and Virginia that are in the top 10 states with the most active duty and reserve members of the military. So, John, this poll caught everybody's attention this morning when NBC put it out. Does it suggest a meaningful edge for Trump in terms of his chance of winning the election?
No is the answer I have to that, and I think it's borne out by one piece of research. You look back and see how John McCain performed in 2008. You look at the exit polls; they exist for that. You look at where Mitt Romney was. There was no exit polling on this in 2012, but there were late polls. Yep. In both cases, Romney and McCain outperformed where Trump is now. So at this level, the gap is narrower, which suggests to me that he's doing worse than previous Republicans, and they lost.
Yeah, I still believe that Trump is underperforming most on the issue of jobs, where he has to convince people he'd be a better jobs president than Clinton. I think if he can't improve those numbers, his chance of winning really go down. This is an area where, yes, he's underperforming other Republicans, but if you look at their resumes, the fact that he's beating her in these areas, given their resumes, I think this may be, the abacus calculation, the three-dimensional abacus, this may be good enough. He may not need to win this group by the same margins in order to win, because he's putting together a different kind of coalition.
Well, again, though, I mean, he's going to have to find extra vote. If she performs the way Obama performs with Obama has performed with the Obama coalition, well, then and he performs roughly the way that Romney and McCain performed,
he'll lose.
He's going to lose. And so I just think that this, in the end, this is not going to be the decisive factor.
Yeah.
It's going to be, can she perform with the Obama coalition? Yep. And can he bring a bunch of new voters into the process who we haven't seen before?
Yep, I agree.
This is basically status quo.
Yep, I agree.
All right, coming up, we'll head south to Florida and Texas, and later today we're joined by Libertarian candidates Gary Johnson and Bill Weld, and we'll be back in a minute. In the words of the immortal Tim Russert, Florida, Florida, Florida. We can always count on the Sunshine State for juicy stories of political intrigue and skullduggery. Our current example, the controversy revolving around Donald Trump's contribution to Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi after his family foundation improperly donated $25,000 to a pro-Bondi PAC back in 2013. The donation came just before the Florida Attorney General declined to join a probe into Trump University, a decision that was promptly followed by a $3,000 per person fundraiser for Bondi hosted by Mr. Trump at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. When we sat down today with Kellyanne Conway, we pressed her on whether there was a link between the money and the decision not to prosecute.
They say that they've never discussed it. I think there's absolutely no equivalence between that and Hillary Clinton using the State Department as a concierge for foreign donors.
I understand, but again, the time, people should just say the fact that the contribution was given around the time the office was making the decision, that's just a coincidence. That's what people should treat it as.
Pam Bondi and Donald Trump said they've never discussed that, so I would say yes.
So today, Mark, on Morning Joe, we both suggested that Trump and Bondi can and should release documents to clear up this whole matter. I do not necessarily expect that to happen anytime soon. So where does this story go?
Well, I think reporters are still going to dig. I still think people are, even without the cooperation of either side, people are going to look to see, and you can bet the Democrats are going to look to try to build on this because they have rightly pointed out that at a minimum it looks bad. And hanging around Trump's neck, despite what Kellyanne Conway told us today and has said elsewhere, is his boasting that he gave money to politicians in order to influence their decisions.
He basically has said in countless settings that giving money to politicians amounted to legal bribery, and he was smart and savvy to do it. So, I mean, I agree with you. I think the sequence of events here is quite damning. And again, it doesn't prove anything, but boy, it stinks.
Florida has an open records law, and I predict people are going to start digging even more than they have. Both sides complain to us daily, not just about our coverage, but coverage in general. Oh, you're treating us unfairly. You and I both agree. We got to go hard after both sides. That's our responsibility, the voters' responsibility. And this goes to questions of judgment, character, and integrity, as many of the issues we talk about regarding to Hillary Clinton. We need to cover policy. We need to cover issues. But this is an example of a multifaceted series of events in which Trump did things that look bad and fit a pattern that he's got of giving, as he has said, to try to influence outcomes.
And I would say making it worse for him is that he lied about it. He lied just when he answered the first question. Oh, I've never met Pam Bondi. I've never spoken to her was his first answer, which Hope Hicks then had to walk back yesterday. You know, when he's lying about it, she has said things that are kind of invite a lot of skepticism. When you have two people who seem to be lying and the fact pattern is what it is, man, I think you just got to look at it in a really, really hard way. And I think it's good if it makes us also go back and look at Trump University. There was a very brief wave of stories about that back when the Clinton campaign was driving it earlier in the summer. I continue to think, on the basis of what we know about that story, that there's more even there to look at that we all should be looking at.
Republican Oppo researchers are all over the Clinton story.
Foundations, everything else.
All right, let's do a quick history lesson. The year 1940. A gallon of gas cost 12 cents. NBC started broadcasting on television, and the Dallas Morning News endorsed Franklin D. Roosevelt for president. That was the last Democrat the Morning News supported for the highest office in the land until now. A new, not very enthusiastic endorsement says, we reject the politics of personal destruction. Hillary Clinton has made mistakes and displayed bad judgment, but her errors are plainly in a different universe than her opponents. So, John, does it matter in this election that the Dallas Morning News, first time in decades, is endorsing a Democrat for president?
I think newspaper editorials matter not at all, not at zero to most voters, including most of the people don't look to newspapers anymore to give them guidance. But I will say it reflects something. It's meaningful in the sense that it tells you something about the fact that there continues to be a lot of disquiet among people who have reliably voted for Republicans forever. This is giving them voice, but it's not going to sway their vote.
The Clinton campaign is sitting on more Republicans and Republican entities who are going to endorse her. There are more that they're courting. There's more that will come that they don't even know about. And the press is, in some cases rightfully, in some cases less so, a sucker for these stories. We're talking about this because it's interesting, decades, Texas paper. Sure. But there will be many more, and they will get their share of news cycle wins, or ties at least, on stuff like this. I think that's why it matters. It's another little pin, another little needle, another little nit, jot, tittle.
We cannot resist it when a man bites a dog.
Yep. Okay. Dallas Morning News endorses a Democrat. That's a dog being bitten by a human being.
Correct. We've got Dan Balls and Adam McGurney, along with Gary Johnson and Bill Well. Those are four really interesting guys. They're all coming up after this.
Welcome back. This is the booking of the year. We're joined now by two political heavyweights, the LA Times, New York Times LA bureau chief Adam McGurney is in the Los Angeles bureau, and the chief correspondent for the Washington Post, Dan Balls, is with us from the Post headquarters in D.C. It's awesome to have you guys on together. Let's stay at 30,000 feet. Start with Dan. Just tell us where you think Clinton v. Trump stands right now.
Closer than it was. Trump's made up some ground. He's had a pretty good couple of weeks. She's not had a great couple of weeks, but there's also, I think, been some natural closing. This is a time when that begins to happen, and then we'll have to see what happens once we get through the first debate. But she's still got an advantage in the Electoral College. You know, it's a cliche by now, but she's got many more paths than he does, and I think all the polling bears that out.
Adam, critique the view of the gentleman from Bethesda.
Dan Balls is always right. The one thing I would add to that is I'd much rather be Hillary Clinton today than Donald Trump. I think she has a lot of institutional advantages. I think you're right in terms of what you're saying about the Electoral College advantages. I agree that clearly there's going to be tightening at this point in the race, especially against a candidate like Clinton, especially given the importance of change in an electoral in a race like this. I mean, I don't think she'd even be where she was were she not running against Trump. But all that said, he is a highly flawed candidate, obviously. I'm not convinced that the debates will long-term change things, maybe. And she's got a lot of ways to win, and I think that right now she's on her way to doing that.
Adam, staying with you on this day where there's a lot of talk about national security, foreign policy, veterans issues, both campaigns seem to think that they're playing a winning hand on this issue. Neither one of them seems to be on defense. Just analyze that. It's not that often when you see two campaigns that both think they're winning on the same issue.
Right, or at least both sort of present the idea that they're winning. I mean, to me, Clinton has a pretty strong, argument. I've always thought this. I think we talked about this before, or the finger on the button, or whatever the equivalent of that is in this digital age, argument against Trump. I mean, the temperament thing, I think, does have some resonance. And the idea of whether or not you want someone who has not had experience in foreign policy to be president during what could be another very difficult time for us. the other hand, Trump raises some very legitimate issues about Clinton's record on this stuff, and I think he's going to keep hitting her on this. But, you know, John, I think at the end of the day, voters are going to go in there and think with two candidates they clearly don't like and clearly don't trust, which one are they going to be more comfortable about having in power to make sort of critical life and death decisions, and who has more experience of that. So I think that Clinton might have a stronger hand to play, but you know, she has a long record of blowing good hands.
Dan, there was a lot of panic in the Republican Party after the conventions that maybe the party would have to abandon their nominee. Trump has had a pretty good run here. Is that talk dead for now in Republican circles?
Well, I think it's tamped down, Mark. I don't think it'll ever go away. I mean, I think that's because there's just so much question in Republican circles, particularly among the people who worry about campaigns down the ballot, about what kind of a candidate he's going to be like. He continues to be a volatile person and a volatile candidate. You know, he's been well scripted. He's stayed on message pretty much, but he always has the capacity to go off. And I think that means that down through this stretch, the Republicans are going to be nervously watching how much they want to embrace him, how much they want to keep a little bit of distance, or which campaigns might want to just simply go in a different direction and take the argument that, you know, we need a check against Hillary Clinton on the assumption that she's going to be the president, and try to play that card. But right now, some of that has tamped down. I think Republicans are hoping against hope that this turn that we've seen in Donald Trump will continue.
Dan, your paper made some news yesterday when it came out with that big national 50-state poll. I want you to talk about that just a little bit. The poll suggested that right now Texas is a toss-up, Mississippi is a toss-up, in addition to places like Georgia and Arizona. You've covered a lot of presidential politics for a long time. Does that comport with your fingertip feel, what your gut is about those states?
No, I think we were all surprised by those. And, you know, I think that there's two things. One, Mississippi is very hard to explain, and I don't think there's any likelihood that Donald Trump loses Mississippi. Texas, as we know, has been a changing state. Democrats have talked about their hope of turning Texas blue, as they put it. I still think it's premature. It's not all that unusual that at this time in elections down in Texas that Democrats begin to feel a little bit more hopeful. Clearly something is maybe stirring down there. We know that the Bushes are not for Donald Trump. We know that Ted Cruz is not for Donald Trump. We now know that the Dallas Morning News is not for Donald Trump, the first time they've endorsed a Democrat since before World War II. So there's something going on down in Texas, but I think in the end, Texas ends up in Trump's column.
Adam, if you strip away all the other variables and just watch the last week of them out on the trail and interviews, et cetera, which candidate to you seems to be performing better?
Here's the problem with that, or the challenge with that question. I think during this week, Trump has been performing better. But, I mean, again and again, I see these sort of scenarios where these sort of things act out where he is like scripted and disciplined for a day or two, and then it always blows apart. I mean, if he could probably have if we knew that A, he could only be on the teleprompter from here on out, and B, that he would only do the teleprompter here on out, he might be a better candidate. I just find that very unlikely. And Mark, I mean, everyone on this show right now knows we're covering Clinton since, you know, the 17th century. Is that she's in some ways like Obama, in that she likes to get her back up against the wall, and just when everyone's writing her off, she sort of gets good again. So I would, you know, they just love these timey the tracks dramas, and I think we'll have at least one or two more of them, and then she'll come again and she'll find her voice and she'll be strong again. And that's just my guess.
Guys, we have some breaking news. Mitt Romney has tweeted for the first time since July, and his tweet says, "I hope the voters get to see former GOP governors Gary Johnson and Bill Weld on the debate stages this fall." We have both those folks, Johnson and Weld, on the show right after you. So just tell me, do you think that Gary Johnson is going to end up in that first debate, either by making the threshold, the 15% threshold, or through some other means, the commission softening or something on its criteria? Start with you, Dan.
I'm still doubtful, unless he's over that 15% threshold, that the commission will relent and put him on stage. I don't rule it out, because I think that this is such an unhappy electorate that's looking for other options, that the commission may feel that they have to provide those in at least one of the debates. So we'll have to wait and see, obviously, on that. But I think he needs to climb a little bit more in the polls in order to make that come about.
Adam, what do you think?
I hate to say this, but I agree with Dan once again. Where was he in the post poll, the 50-state poll?
He was at about, well,
13.
we didn't have it.
13, I believe.
We didn't have an actual national number. I think
He
he's
was
generally...
above 15 in a number of states.
Yeah, in a
He
number
was
of
above
states.
15 in 15 states.
Right, in 15 states.
Above 15 in
Okay.
15 states.
A little confusing.
Okay,
All
that
right.
says a lot.
Dan Balls, Washington Post, Adam Negrini, New York Times. Guys, I got to say, no substitute for experience. Great to have you on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
And
Dan.
those mingy beards on both of them.
All right, coming up, a campaign manager walks into a hotel bar. You'd be shocked at what happens next. We'll tell you that right after this.
So this morning, Mark and I, as we often do at like 9:30 or 10 a.m., we're sitting in a nearby hotel bar when who should walk in but Trump campaign manager Kellyanne Conway. So we asked her to take a seat. We pulled out our newly outdated iPhones and conducted an interview. We started by asking if voters really care about national security and who has the upper hand on that front.
Well, national security and terrorism really have catapulted to the top of the voter concern list. Obviously, jobs, the economy, everyday affordability very much on voters' minds, Mark. But you do see with the increasing advance of ISIS, which, of course, our president referred to as the JV team and said was contained, and Hillary Clinton referred to them as our, quote, determined enemies instead of the savage murderers they are at her convention speech in July. You see many Americans really worried about terrorism, these random acts of violence here and abroad, San Bernardino, Orlando certainly, and then of course Brussels, Paris, Nice, etc. So people are very worried about our place in the world, and they're very worried about having a secure world. And I did notice in the new NBC poll that Donald Trump has about a 20-point advantage among veterans and military households, and I think that tells you who has an advantage this year on national security.
Why would a businessman who's never held elective office be seen as stronger than she, someone who's been Secretary of State and First Lady and a senator on armed services? Like, why would that be?
It's a great question. The answer seems to be centered in a few things. Number one, she had the title of Secretary of State, but people are increasingly understanding what that meant. She had more than one half of the meetings, as has been reported, were with donors to the Clinton Foundation. It's a pretty inappropriate use of State Department time. The people at the State Department work for us, the taxpayers, and last time I looked, there are a lot of trouble spots around the world who can really use the United States State Department's help. How about giving rights to women and girls in countries where the Clinton Foundation took money while she was at the State Department, which don't really give rights to women and girls, don't respect them the same way we do here. So people are starting to look at that record and saying, gee, the Russia reset was your idea. That's a really embarrassing, odd moment, poor judgment. Libya, Syria, bad judgment. Benghazi, bad judgment, certainly. And so they're starting to scrutinize that record and saying, if 2/3 of the country actually want to go in a different direction and Hillary Clinton represents the old direction, then maybe we'll look at Mr. Trump. What has he said? He has said that he's got a 10-point plan to reform the Veterans Administration, that these brave men and women should not come home and not be cared for. It's a scourge on our nation that we don't properly care for our veterans. That's part of his platform. The other thing is he has talked about strength through peace. He's talked about American exceptionalism. He has talked about making sure that we just don't go into war willy-nilly. I mean, Hillary Clinton voted for the Iraq War. It's a large part of how President Obama beat her in the Democratic primary in 2008.
But it'd be unprecedented for the country, particularly at a time of unrest internationally and people concerned about terrorism, to turn things over to someone who's never held elective office, has no military background. So is that something you're concerned about? Or how do you get over the public's obvious rational concern that he's not someone with a typical background to be commander-in-chief?
Well, first of all, President Obama had limited elective office experience and certainly no hands-on military experience when he was elected. So this country is very willing to do that, to put somebody in charge when they think those who have been in charge have failed. And obviously, then Senator Obama's ability to say, hey, I was always against the Iraq War, which was a nagging issue for voters in 2008. It helped him beat Hillary Clinton in the primary, certainly in the Democratic primary. It helped him become president of the United States against Senator John McCain. And so I do think the electorate is willing to do it because they look at, I think it was Senator Obama when he was running in 2008, he had a great line. He said, listen, you talk about experience, you say I don't have enough of it. If experience has gotten us to this place in Iraq and Afghanistan, then we should really think about the value of experience. I think that's very much the Trump message in part this time about Secretary Clinton.
I'll just note before switching topics that there is some indication that he wasn't uniformly opposed to the Iraq War.
He disagrees with that.
I know, but Howard Stern would disagree.
He disagrees with that.
Do you know the facts around his decision to make a contribution to Pam Bondi's political organization? Do you know anything about that?
As I understand it is Mr. Trump and Attorney General Bondi never discussed the Trump University matter at all. It's very customary for him to contribute to Republican candidates across this country. He's been very generous in his contributions, including to some of the candidates who don't support him now in his presidency. And that's what he said. He obviously is a Floridian.
So without seeing the documents involved with the Trump organization in terms of their decision to do it, you're just asking people to accept the timing as a coincidence? Given that the contribution came right around the time her office was making a decision.
Yes, they say that they've never discussed it. I think there's absolutely no equivalence between that and Hillary Clinton using the State Department as a concierge for foreign donors.
I understand, but again, the time, people should just say the fact that the contribution was given around the time the office was making the decision, that's just a coincidence. That's what people should treat it as.
Pam Bondi and Donald Trump said they've never discussed that, so I would say yes.
Shouldn't it be incumbent on Pam Bondi there should be an email trail on this, right? If there was no discussion of how this all happened, we should be able to see documents that. But you know
I have no idea. I have no idea, but I really hope everybody covers that with the same kind of vigor. The just literally hundreds of millions of dollars funneling through foreign donors to the Clinton Foundation, while Hillary Clinton's Secretary of State, I would say everybody go see it or read Clinton Cash to really put all the pieces together.
There's been a fair amount of coverage, obviously, of the foundation and the various questions around that. I guess my question is, there's a New York Times story today that says, look, there's a whole history of Trump in this state violating campaign finance regulations and rules. He's proudly said in various debates that he gave contributions to politicians because he wanted to get stuff from them. And he was proud of it. He said that on multiple occasions. Again, to Mark's question, the prima facie case here is she was considering whether to take some action on the basis of the Trump University stuff. The contribution happened. It was an illegal contribution because it came from the charitable foundation. She then decided not.
$25,000.
She then decided not.
And it's not a foreign government.
She then decided. I understand, but we're just talking about what seems to a lot of people look like straightforward pay for play.
Oh, it's ridiculous. By the way, Donald Trump.
Why is it ridiculous?
Because
the contribution was made. She decided not to take action, and then he hosted a fundraiser for her shortly thereafter.
But he hosts fundraisers for many.
Why is that? Why is that sequence of events not? Shouldn't that be
because
troubling?
because I think the whole reason that it's in the news is because Donald Trump's actually winning in some of the polls now, including the CNN poll, and people are worried that he can actually win.
Our thanks to Kellyanne Conway for taking part in that little on-the-fly interview. We'll be right back with the Libertarian presidential candidate Gary Johnson and his running mate Bill Weld right after this. And as always, if you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can also listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM, and we'll be right back.
One is a mountain climber, the other dabbles in fiction writing, but together they're running a third-party bid to take over the White House. So our next guest, former governor of New Mexico, Gary Johnson. He's the Libertarian candidate for president, and his vice presidential running mate, the former governor of Massachusetts, Bill Weld. Governors, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We want to cover a ton with you guys. I'm going to start with some policy and talk about the U.S.-China relationship. What's working in the U.S.-China relationship now? What is not working that you would try to change as president?
Well, I think we need to join arms with China to deal with North Korea. So diplomatically, I think that's something that we have to push for. Free trade, absolutely believe in free trade. I realize the TPP does not include China, but look, I do not view China as the adversary. I don't view them as an adversary.
Do you view them as a military threat at all? The current government
No,
does.
I wouldn't think of them in those respects. I think it's a very interesting time because of where Xi Jinping is, and I was thrilled that he, not being a cult of personality guy, but coming from the reformist government of Guangdong through his family, won out over Bo Xilai, who was more of a Maoist and a cult guy. And so I thought that Xi Jinping, at the end of the day, would want to steer the country in a more Western orientation for economics purposes, and I still think that, but along the way, he has decided the Communist Party is number one. It has to be protected at all costs, so we've got the huge anti-corruption probe, and being responsive to what the people want about the smog in Beijing. Those are two things he's pushing very hard, so I think there's a lot to work with in terms of helping him look good, and I think we can engage productively on that basis.
I think we're seeing the tip of the iceberg also in government-controlled economy, and that it's just going to get a whole lot worse, not better.
So Russia's been a pretty big issue in this election, more than we normally see in recent vintage, partly because there's this perception that Putin is trying to actually meddle in our affairs. Donald Trump seen as being more friendly to Putin, more friendly to Russia, Hillary Clinton less. Give me a sense of what your posture would be towards Russia.
Well, one thing I would like to do is I would like to engage Putin in a game of chess. I would love to do that, and I think Bill would love to have that same opportunity. But that said, we need to join hands with Russia diplomatically to deal with Syria. That's the solution when it comes to Syria. Do we really want to go to war over the Baltic states? I don't believe so. And USSR, look, it broke up. Ukraine, part of the USSR. That's if you want to call that a civil war, I wouldn't call it a civil war, but certainly a division of alliances. And do we really want to inject ourselves in that? Going forward, I'd like to strengthen relations with Russia. I'd like to not divide, not have a policy of division or antagonism.
Do you sense that Russia's trying to meddle in the American election? Is that on the basis of the evidence that we currently have in terms of the hacks?
I would say it trends that way a little bit. I mean, I think with Russia, and that's the second most important relationship after China, I would approach it with somewhat less pleasure than the relationship with China. I mean, in the European theater, our interests are not coincident, and what Putin wants to do is not in our interest. And his annexation of the Crimea, while the whole world kind of acquiesced, that was an aggressive move. So it's a little bit testier, perhaps, but Russia has been a great country for a long time, and nothing would give me greater pleasure than being able to find common ground there. I agree with Governor Johnson. I think Syria is Exhibit A, and the Chinese and the Russians have worked with us on various UN Security Council issues just in the last couple of years, so it's not hopeless.
A name, current former Supreme Court justice, who would be your model for the kind of justice you would nominate, and why?
You know, I never name names. I never name names for anything. I certainly talk about qualifications, but I think it's just a mistake to name names. In the context of, and as governor of New Mexico, I was surprised at how many people came to apply for every single job in state government, that agreeing with you, Governor Johnson, philosophically on what you've got to say.
What would you look for in a Supreme Court nominee?
Well, the notion that a Supreme Court nominee would view the Constitution from the standpoint of original intent. Really, today we talked, and we're going to get a briefing on what those words really mean and how we might better describe that.
But it means a lot, though. I mean, original intent means to keep in mind that this is a federal government of enumerated powers, limited specified powers. And under the 10th Amendment, powers not expressly conferred on the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people.
What's a current Supreme Court decision on the books that you disagree with? Prominent case.
I think I would probably dial back Citizens United a little bit. I'm not sure Gary agrees with that.
Well, Kehoe for me is just
Kelo, the New London case? Yeah.
Is that Kelo?
I believe it's Kelo.
Yeah.
That's the one that taking for public purposes and then given to another private party. And now it's a feral cat nest. So it didn't work out.
So you were asked yesterday on Reddit about something I'm interested in. You are famously in favor of legalizing marijuana. You were asked about other black markets, sports gambling, for instance, prostitution. You didn't exactly answer the question on Reddit, so I ask you now, are you in favor of legalizing those kind of markets?
Well, I think those markets really are states' issues, bottom line, and so I'm not looking from a federal standpoint to address those. Now, I do recognize or believe that the federal government did step in and prevent online poker from occurring. Well, whatever decision or whatever I might do to reverse that, I would reverse that.
All right, but you said in principle, do you think the idea that should prostitution be legal, is that something in principle you favor as a libertarian?
Well, leaving it to the states, and in principle, look, I've never engaged the services of a prostitute. I have no intention of doing so. But if you were to do so, where would you do that? Well, you'd do it in the only state where it was legal. You'd do that in Nevada, where you knew you wouldn't contract a sexual transmitted disease. But I'll leave that to the states.
Okay.
Fabulous way to end this segment.
Yes, well.
Have to say. All right, the governors are going to stick around. We're going to talk a little bit about the politics, the challenge they face right after this.
We are back with the Libertarian ticket for president, the former governors, Gary Johnson and Bill Weld. Let's turn to politics, guys. The big question you're facing right now, the 15% threshold to get into that first presidential debate. Do you think that threshold is too high?
I don't think the threshold is too high, but the issue is that we're not included in any top-line poll, meaning Johnson, Trump, Clinton. That doesn't occur, period. 100% of polls is Trump and Clinton. Maybe we're the third name down in about half of those polls. But if we were on the top line, tomorrow we'd be at 20% minimum. And I've said this humorously before, and I mean it. If Mickey Mouse were the third name included with Trump and Clinton, Mickey would be at 30 because Mickey's a known commodity. But Mickey's not on the ballot in all 50 states, and we are.
Mickey doesn't vet, by the way, just so you know.
So if you accept the notion that 15 is the standard that you're trying to reach, we have a story up on BloombergPolitics.com today talking about how you guys are advertising in a lot of western and mountain states, right? Relatively sparsely populated states. Why spend money advertising in states like that rather than going big and national, which might do more to drive your number up closer to 15%?
Well, among other things, we're at 15, 19, 23, 25 in those states. And the Republican co-chair of the Commission on Debates has said that maybe running well above 15% in swing states would be good. Gary's running over 15% in 15 states. He's running in double digits in 40 states. He was at 13% yesterday in the Washington Post poll. It's clear were a factor. He leads among active military. He leads among young millennials. He's second among independents. So it's not like we're way down there. And I do think that the 15% figure is arbitrary. The Annenberg Commission recommended to the Debate Commission in 2013 that they lower that to 10. But to me, the overwhelming fact here is that 75 to 80% of the electorate, not just an interest group, wants us, Johnson Weld, in the debates. And the Presidential Commission is a tax-exempt nonprofit whose sole purpose is to help educate, quote unquote, the citizenry on the presidential election. How can they say Johnson Weld should not even be in the debates? They're answering the wrong question. They're answering the question, who do we think we like for president of the United States? The R party and the D party who pay our bills through their major contributors? Or, you know, are they answering the question, who should be president instead of who should be in the debate?
If your poll numbers are high, but they reach a decision, well, they're not quite high enough in certain places, certain timing, certain time frame, are you prepared to try to take some action to reverse their decision?
You know, I think that there will be consequences for that. We're not in the Iraq-Afghanistan Veterans Association forum this evening, and
did you take action to try to change that?
Well, by take action, they took a lot of heat for it. I think that there'll be a lot of heat that will go along with not putting us in the debates.
Governor Weld, you're a pretty good lawyer. Any legal recourse if you're denied access to the debate?
Well, just to point out to the Internal Revenue Service that they're not being nonpartisan, which is a condition of their tax exemption.
They the commission.
They the commission on debates, sure. No big thing. It's just they would go out of existence.
But that wouldn't get you in the debate, right? If you just
not in September.
Sent a letter to the IRS.
Not in September. Not in time for the first debate.
Is there a way you could do a lawsuit against the commission in that?
You know, I think public opinion is going to be more important than any lawsuit. And a lawsuit almost buries the issue. I'm going to make a lot of noise every day between now and November 8th on this whole constellation of issues. Are you, beyond the powers of your charter? Are you answering the wrong question? Are you being faithful to your supposed mission of educating the voters of the United States? Or are you part of the Washington brainwashing scheme?
Governor Weld just suggested that maybe not in September it wouldn't get you into the debate, but there are two more debates obviously scheduled currently. If you don't make it into the first debate, do you keep pressing on and try to get in that second and third?
Absolutely. And I think the way that things are ratcheting right now, that you could have a situation right now that if they announce the debates, let's say in 7 or 8 days, that could actually reverse itself. So nothing can be in concrete because this is a moving target. And I will just tell you, we have a lot of momentum going here, and if you were to choose anything happening in your candidacy, it would be momentum, and momentum doesn't reverse itself.
When you said announce the debates, you meant announce who's going to be in the debates.
Announce who's in the first debates.
Right. Who's playing Donald Trump in your debate prep?
I think Bill is going to play Donald Trump.
I was going to say he doesn't know it yet, but that person is sitting here.
Who's playing Hillary Clinton then? Also sitting here?
We've got all her briefing books. We don't need it.
Obviously, access to debates is a huge issue, understandably. So are you otherwise feeling, we'd love to have you on all the time whenever you're here and otherwise, but do you all feel like, for instance, the media is giving you enough access to the airways to make your case on issues and differentiation?
There's an insatiable appetite among earned media right now. And I was just saying, Mark, have you seen the Abraham Lincoln political video, which is now the most watched political video of all time? Came out 10 days ago, and there's been 18 million
So you don't feel you're being denied access to the airways?
Well, right. Earned media, they're insatiable appetite.
More would never hurt. We'd take up residence in New York and not leave.
Okay. Right. We promise to give you more. If you come, we'll put you on the air. Governors Gary Johnson, Bill Weld, thank you both. We will be right back.
I got to say, those guys are impressive. I think their chances of getting into debate are not as weak as I thought before. And I think if they get on the debate stage, they can really make waves in this race.
I think they are impressive. I think they are, if they had a higher national profile, they would have a huge impact on this race, maybe more of an impact than Ross Perot had in 1992. And I hope that the commission seriously considers bending whatever arbitrary rules it has to get them on that stage.
And you and Mitt Romney agree.
Me and Mitt Romney
All right,
agree.
you can head right now to BloombergPolitics.com. All our coverage on Trump's big national security speech, which made waves today. Coming up here on Bloomberg West, Emily Chang has the latest on Apple's big product event today. Thanks for watching. Until tomorrow, sayonara.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg West. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. Hillary Clinton leads Donald Trump in the northeastern U.S., though her advantage in some states lies within the margin of error. An Emerson College survey shows that Rhode Island, traditionally a strong Democratic state, features an especially close race. Clinton at 44%, Trump at 41%. The poll indicates races in New Jersey and New Hampshire are also close. Clinton's ahead in Connecticut, Vermont, Massachusetts, and Maine. A North Dakota judge issued a warrant today for the arrest of Green Party presidential nominee Jill Stein. She's accused of spray painting construction equipment during a protest against the Dakota Access Pipeline. No word yet on whether she plans to turn herself in. Secretary of State Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov will meet in Geneva Thursday to discuss a possible Syria deal. Russia's a key ally of President Bashar al-Assad, while the U.S. supports rebels fighting to overthrow the Syrian president. The International Olympic Committee is promising full cooperation with Brazilian authorities in a ticket scalping investigation that targeted one of its top executives. Ireland's Olympic Committee chief is one of 10 people charged. IOC President Thomas Bach missed the opening of the Paralympics in Rio, where police plan to interview him. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg West is next.